Welcome to the Ave Podcast with Cal C on South Shore Ave Radio.
So first of all, let me welcome you back, Kevin W., part of the South Shore Ave family. How you doing today, sir?
Quite well for Cal. Damn it. I'm off to a rough start. Hanging in, my man. Hope you're doing well. Hope everyone's doing well.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. I've, the last month and a half or so been focused on my R&B fantasy draft series when, everything came out with Kanye West first. And, I didn't want to respond really because, to be honest, I just really needed a Kanye break. A little exhausted with Kanye. Just overall, I didn't care what he had to say, yay or nay, whether I agree with it or not. I'm like, I just did a break. I just didn't really care.
I like what you did there with the yay or nay.
Yeah, thank you. And, then the Kyrie stuff happened, and wow, did that explode. And I was finally going to respond to it last week, but, a couple things happened. Mainly, number one, the kids getting sick, is definitely a thing. But secondly, I noticed a pattern that I've seen all too often, where it's like the mainstream media was diving head first and somersaulting into everything Kanye and Kyrie. Whether you think it was right or wrong, one thing we can all agree on is that it was all over the place. But there's another story that was, I like to say, that was hiding under the blanket, about to sneak out the back room, that, in my opinion, should have received as much attention considering the devastation it caused, or it helped cause. And it was a scandal in Mississippi regarding Brett Favre and the misappropriation of state welfare funds in the Mississippi Department of Human Resources. So for those that don't know the story, there's a big Mississippi welfare scam scandal right now that's going on, where up to $70 million was diverted from the welfare fund to the rich. And according to News One and CNN, I'm just going to read this verbatim. Earlier this month, an auditor revealed that $70 million in temporary assistance for needy families, TANF, welfare funds were dished out to a multimillionaire athlete, a professional wrestler, a horse farm, and a volleyball complex. From that money, $8.1 million was allegedly given to entities tied to Brett Favre. And according to sources, Favre was paid $1.1 million in federal welfare funds in 2017 and 2018 for motivational speeches he allegedly never gave. So the former governor of the state, Phil Davis, helped divert at least $5 million into a volleyball arena project for Favre and the University of Southern Mississippi, where at the time, his daughter was playing for the volleyball team. So I'll say it again, where at the time his daughter was playing for the volleyball team. So think about this. You got over 33% of the black population living under the poverty line. And in Jackson, Mississippi, it's Flint 2.0 going on over there right now. They haven't had clean water in months, and this has been going on for decades. It's one of, if not the poorest state in America. And $70 million of that goes missing. Now, how does that story just get swept under the rug? Like, how does Kanye and Kyrie completely knock this story off the radar? Don't get me wrong. This is not a comparison thing. This is not a quality thing, because as much as they got ridiculed, they didn't commit a crime. And while, this directly affected black communities across the board in that state. Now, this has become a legal matter, and some of this is still pending, and maybe eventually it might get to that point. But for the coverage, the intensity of it is nowhere near the same impact. And here's the other thing too, Kev. Like, we live in a society where content is not only king and information is highly accessible, but there are so many networks, media conglomerates, podcasts, social media sites that are on a 24-hour cycle. How do we not have enough time to talk about this? So I guess the question, just to start with you, just to, I guess I got to ask is, being that we've had this discussion probably the last little bit, what comes to your mind when you see this story about Brett Favre? And this is not a football story. This is a human story right here.
Let me see how the best way I can put this. Give me 2 seconds. I'm going to use the word privilege, if that's okay with you.
I think that's only right.
Okay. I think it speaks to a certain amount of privilege that that's allotted to some people more than others, and also a priority in the news feed as to who is who's next to be put on the spigot, basically, and roasted publicly. And as long as we have certain distractions, the people that might want to still be held in high public esteem can easily sit on the back burner or keep making their way to the back of the line. These are federally granted. That's money straight from Washington allocated to Mississippi, correct?
Correct.
So that is from a,
federal funds.
These are federal funds, of which we're talking over $70 million has been taken. And who knows for how long this may have been going on for as well, right? Because it's been relatively quiet. And I, again, thank you for, non-objective journalism to actually look into this with the magnifying glass that it deserves. Because apparently there have been rumblings for this for years, and we never heard anything about it.
Yeah.
Now, granted, we're talking about one of the poorest states, like you said. I believe it is the poorest.
Yeah.
But the mere fact that it is the poorest, wouldn't that help to be like, how? Maybe this explains why they've been so poor for so long. What have they been doing? How long has this regime been in place that's just been fleecing the government of this money? And where did it go? We know where most of it has been allocated to, but how much? And I guess, again, here comes the hard part. When you're not distracted by everything else and you actually get to look up and you start asking questions, it might get a little bit murky. But I do appreciate the anonymity of this entire case. So we're going to talk about Brett Favre. Of course, he's the lead name, but a former professional wrestler. We have his name, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we have there were 3 gentlemen and one lady that were found. Like, those were the top 4 ringleaders that went on with this case. And I mean, some of that money apparently also went for, you heard about the nasal concussion spray for Brett Favre that he was coming up with?
No.
I think it was called something along the lines of an experimental concussion treatment nasal spray called Pervicus. And I think there was about a shade over $2 million granted to him from that for some pharmaceutical research or whatever the case may be. I believe that's on top of the no-show for the speeches, the motivational speeches where he pulled a Herschel Walker at the podium. Remember that Phantom photo? No one was there? All right. Well, there's a paycheck cut for that. And did you also hear about, like, a little bit deeper, found out that he was trying to help recruit Deion Sanders' son to go to his school of choice? And he asked for about $1.5 million to try and upgrade the facility or something like that, basically. But this has been a well that they've been tapping dry for a while.
Mm-hmm.
And this is, again, allegedly, of course, just to cut down on labor costs of his $1.5 million proposed upgrade to the university to help recruit Deion Sanders' son. In case costs got too high, Brett Favre allegedly said we can bring in some prison labor to help cut down on costs. Sorry, you were saying, Calvin.
Well, and this is, to the point, I guess, is the source of the name of the podcast, right, of this episode is based on privilege, right? Because, I mean, and this is probably part of the reason why I couldn't stand Brett Favre for so many years, right? And this is just as a football player. And not to say he wasn't a good player, he was. You know what I mean? Like, I don't want to take anything away from his accolades, to a certain extent. But the way, I think the part of it was the way they were on it when he was on in his prime. Like, it bothered me, because, and this is just me being, I guess, a little petty, but I mean, I think he's probably one of the only football players if not one of the if he's not the only one of the very few that's won 3 straight MVPs and all of it was based on. I thought of a lot of it was based on hype. He was nice, but there was guys that was doing their thing. For him to get three in a row, I thought that was crazy, right? And that always bothered me just as a football fan. But what I didn't like, was, and I know this is speaking to something different, but what I didn't like is when he started slipping, and he was slipping for a long time. Like the media kept propping him up, like he was still this, like he was a deity. You know what I mean? And
Right.
you'd watch like other black quarterbacks like a Donovan McNabb. The moment he had a bad game, he would just get ripped to shreds. And he was a good player too for a long time, and he was better than Favre for a long time. And you used to see every time like Favre would have like maybe like in a 16-game year, especially when you were struggling, you have maybe like a quarter of those games you play good. Like I watched the game one time where he threw 6 interceptions, and they were still talking about him like he was the king. And I'm like, what are we watching here? And that drove my hate for Brett Favre, right? But I'm like, okay, well maybe this is just my thing, just as a football thing, and the way the media propped him up, and they definitely did, and I couldn't stand that about him. But I'm like, hey, maybe he's whatever, this is just football. Nothing else is going to come of it. But then now I'm just like, well, maybe my intuition was right, Kevin. Maybe that was the reason why I couldn't stand him, even when he threw those touchdowns over the years, and I would just be cursing at the screen. Maybe there was a reason. Maybe the future me was telling that present me that don't like this guy, and it was for reasons like this, right? The use of the use of privilege, because like his post career. From commercials to just how he's treated. He's retired or whatever, but like the love that that up until recently he was still getting. You're just like what can this guy not do wrong? I mean, this reeks of the whole Felicity Huffman thing, right?
Right.
It's disgusting because people, especially who deserve it, are losing opportunities, and with this case, like this directly affected, the black community, where money was not given to them where they needed it. In a state where it's the poorest state, they needed that money. This is a legal matter now, and we don't even hear about this anymore. It's crazy to me.
Have there been any arrests?
And Brett Favre is like, I mean, this is a Hall of Fame legendary football player. This is a well-known person, even in retirement. This is a well-known person.
Yeah, but he gave the money back, Calvin.
He didn't give it. He didn't give it back to the hood.
His text, perhaps his lack of even showing up for those speaking engagements will give you a good idea why he won't even venture to the hood. He wants nothing to do with the hood. Let me rewatch those Wrangler commercials and see who he was playing with. But look, it's interesting because deep down, like based off of certain optics, if some roles were reversed, there's no way these involved parties would still be out and about walking, picking up groceries, and going camping or anything like that, right? They would have found a way a while back to make sure that they could lock you up on something if they wanted to. And if they couldn't, they'd make up a law overnight and go make sure to go get them, But I believe society and the media has really done, like, this is the peak of the NFL season. There's not much mention of it. This is when everybody knows, but there seems to be more concern or media attention as to where OBJ might sign, rather than the fact that a former NFL player was defrauding the government or in cahoots with a group of people that were bleeding government funds dry. That it would have been covered differently, and there would be no hesitation to say scandal and list the names of there would have been no hesitation in listing all the charges filed against, putting them on TV and putting their faces on television, recapping it every hour, making sure that every show portrays that image. But for now, it's just like no, back burner, shh, shh, shh. Like a sleeper hold, slowly try to fade away. I say sleeper hold because, of course, one of the alleged parties is the son of the former $1 million man, Ted DiBiase. But yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I mean, do you think like Favre sends Kanye and Kyrie like a gift basket this Christmas, just for taking them off just taking them off the media?
I don't know who. Again, just a hunch now. Just a hunch. I don't think he's had much interaction with people like Kyrie and Kanye since he was teammates with them in the NFL.
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, right? Like, like I said, you're not trying to sit there and play the comparison game, but I mean, how do you not? Like, and to me, this was the biggest thing. Like, when everybody the whole world was talking about Kyrie, and I mean, he apologized. He's done everything that he was supposed to do. And yet still after every game, he's still being questioned about it. Like this is going to stick with him for basically the next year. And because Favre is in a different situation, he's retired, right? As a football player, he's not going to have the same cameras in his face all the time. I get that part of it. But my issue is just the fact that, again, like, you're hearing this story, for example, like just one of the stories, for example, that I heard was, and I guess I'll throw out the term allegedly, but one of the things was there was a black father who had his on welfare and was struggling to keep his child. He was on the verge of losing his kid. They couldn't afford to support his kid, and he tried to get a public defender, to help fight his case. But that money that would have helped him fight that case was gone as part of the $70 million that was lost. You know that man has basically lost his kid, and when I say lost his kid, I mean he's lost his kid to the system. His kid is basically in foster care, and there's no plans on him being reunited with his son right now, and that's based directly on the money being missing from this. This has a direct effect on what's happening within the black community. You know what I mean? Or the poor communities and such, and nobody's getting access to this money. This has been siphoned. Like, this is crazy.
And all parties involved are still out and about, free and released, pending further investigation. It's a lot of gratitude there. That's, Calvin, a story like that should be headline news, shouldn't it?
Well, it was, but not for long.
No. We're talking $70 million. That's one case of many. That there would be quite possibly a large chunk. Everyone, let me put it this way. That story could be one of many, and that couldn't even be the worst story of things that have happened as a result of this money being siphoned off. Right? Yeah. Sometimes when they have these cases, on television, they'll fly every victim in, and they'll stand them like an elementary school photo. They'll line them all up, and they'll ask them a series of questions as to how they've been affected, this, that, and the third. Has there been a special like that? When there have been mass victims of people stealing money from the government, I believe if you owe the government, they can come after you with fire and fury. Right? You can't hide if you owe the government. Imagine stealing money from the government.
I know.
Whew.
And it speaks to a much larger problem, because it's one thing, for someone like this to take advantage of the media, but when you start using your influence to take a dip into state funds that's supposed to be for the people who really need it, like, when does that privilege now become punishable? Like, the fact that even in the media, for this story to be submerged, something this heinous to be hidden under the covers for over a month is a sign that it most likely will not be punishable. And what always bothers me is that, we live in an era, as I said before, of content, 24-hour content pressure and social media. Why does this story, in comparison to the two situations with Kanye and Kyrie, why does it have to be one or the other? If the other individuals can be on TV nonstop for all of us to judge, why can't this man? Out of the three, this man can and should be jailed for what he's done. And he knew what he was doing the entire time. Like, it wasn't like this was like a Mr. Magoo situation. And yet it's Jiminy Crickets. Like, it's wild to me, Kevin. It's wild to me. And look, and if that wasn't enough, here comes a picture of Jerry Jones, the owner of the Cowboys, in 1957, looking over the shoulder of bullies that were keeping black kids out of his high school. And here's what I find amazing with that as well. Like, number one, Black Twitter should be a Marvel action hero, honestly. Give it an armored suit is basically Iron Man, right? But let's be clear, though. No person wants to be defined by their worst moments, obviously, right? And what they've done as a kid or a teenager, none of us is perfect. None of us has a perfect resume. Even though you've heard the stories of what Jones has done, for his former black players has played for him. The fact that he has a black quarterback playing for him on a flagship franchise, probably the biggest sports franchise on earth, or top 2 or 3. You can only wonder what other moments in his life that he, in his words, looked the other way, right? And it's funny because you hear Stephen A. Smith talking today about how, he's upset because, this is something he's gotten judged on 60-something years ago. And I understand that part of it. But my other point is, does he now get pulled to the pulpit the same way other guys do? This is the problem, right? Of the whole privilege aspect of it, right? Like, and we know why there's the privilege aspect is there. Like, this is self-explanatory. But I think it bears watching, like, in this situation, like, it's not even really being, at least before it used to be slick. It's not even being slick anymore. Like, the shit is just out in your face, like, yeah, it's privilege, and they're probably going to get away with it, and we're going to move on to the next story. And there's not much we can really do about it. I find that's extremely problematic.
I empathize and I understand where you're coming from, because just looking at it visually and processing how the treatments have been, what black men have thought is deemed to be more dangerous and worthy of more attention and persecution than what their white counterparts may have actually done. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Kanye and Kyrie's thoughts are more important than somebody who may have was very close to the blocking of an angry mob towards integration in what state was that again?
I think it was Texas.
Arkansas?
No, I think it was Texas.
Okay. I thought it was anyway.
Could have been Arkansas, yeah. Could have been Arkansas. I'm not sure. Arkansas, Texas is in the South.
Right. And this Brett Favre situation is happening where?
In Mississippi.
Which is in the...
Right. Keep going.
Okay. So anyway, what's happened with that photo, which again, I got to tell you, for somebody to sift through and imagine what he looked like as a young kid, you know what I mean? Or find the high school and the photo. What are the odds?
I know.
Amazing. But to say that people can fleece the United States government and, be part of, a divisive part, and granted, he may have been curious, apparently, right? Clearly. The angry guy with the cigarette in his mouth, he was probably curious as well, and just squinting, not yelling anything negative, directly at the students. Yeah, it's very interesting how some stories get buried as quickly as possible. They go from page A1 to D17, and there are others that just stay on the front page over and over and over again. Interesting.
Yeah, and I mean, we shouldn't be shocked by that, and we know that, right? But and again, this is where when the privilege is cocooned financially within a system that protects them, or will die trying for them. You would never see the equality there, right? Like, and again, the football game was yesterday. We're recording this on Friday, the day after the U.S. Thanksgiving, and I'm not expecting it to be mentioned in the broadcast at all, right? But you're just like, wow, nobody's gonna talk about this like at all. You know what I mean? I mean, so you're not shocked, but you're still kind of like, man. So no mention of the picture. Like, no, not one show is 9 hours of football. Not one show is gonna mention this picture.
We have 24-hour sports channels too, don't we?
You know, and again, I wasn't watching TV today really, so I don't know how often it's been talked about, but it's just, to me, I find it incredibly wild. It's a privileged aspect because nobody's gonna take Jones's team. I'm not saying they should, but I'm like, nobody's gonna take the team away from him. Nobody's gonna threaten him for that. Is it gonna be a situation where like does he have to answer for that? Like, to have a press conference and sit there and talk about, this photo. And I've heard people today, like, or at least on Twitter, like, talk about how, like, for example, the way he was adamant about anybody kneeling, when Kaepernick was kneeling back in 2016, it's either you better stand up or you get cut. And then you do it the showboating way, like a couple of weeks later with your whole team locked in arms, and the only thing is missing from him is winking at the camera. And then when you hear a story like this, it just, it doesn't, I'm not, I'm saying the optics of it don't look good. But the difference is it's his choice if he decides to go to the pulpit, where it's like a black athlete, a black entertainer, a black celebrity. It's like it is basically almost mandatory for them to do so. Like nobody's asking Jerry Jones or Brett Favre to do a 6-point manifest, to get back into the good graces of public society.
Well, maybe Jerry and the other owners can take a knee on Sunday so that they can acknowledge that we're all in this together and we want to. What is it at the end of the end zone? End racism? Isn't that one of the NFL logos? It's in the small print in the end zone there, right at the back underneath the uprights. Maybe they can. We can't be surprised anymore. It is interesting though, because I did try to find that article on one well-known website, and it appears that the article was pulled within 24 hours of the photo coming out. Did you have that problem, Calvin?
Well, I think you have to pay for the article.
No. Well, anyway, it's interesting how quickly that kind of, got etch-a-sketched away. But let's think about it. It can be an overt situation or it can be a covert situation. But if you pulled up the history of that team, its negotiation with certain players versus negotiations with others, the coaching hires, you ask yourself, okay, well, is this why the NFL needed a Rooney Rule to begin with?
It's just a way of thinking, It's the ways of thinking that, in a sense, that even if they don't know if it's wrong, nobody's going to correct them on it. And even if they do, it's a situation where it's like, well, okay, it's going to go under the rug. Nothing's going to happen to them. They're that powerful. Like I said, again, I'm not expecting, Jerry Jones to lose his team from this. You know what I mean? And this is why I kind of, discussed, I'm mentioning this with the Favre situation, and only because, and again, what he did was not criminal, but the optics of it isn't good, and nobody's going to have them answer for this. You know what I mean? In the way that other athletes, other celebrities have to answer for it when they make a mistake.
It is interesting that somehow, some way, one side can always have the concert hall, banquet hall, or what, an auditorium, or at their facility, have some sort of impromptu press conference to address these issues, when another side is just granted the absolute, we don't want to talk about it, we're not going to say anything. I'm surprised the government hasn't called, like, hey, Brett, what's going on here? Or
well, they are now. That's the thing. They are now, but it's not the media perception of it is not. That's like that. That is a different energy.
I'm talking about the coverage. The coverage.
Yeah, that's what I mean, right?
Because the last little bit of information I got is like, 2 months ago, and then like 1 month ago, and I'm okay. Well, there's nothing, like, this isn't catching more steam. Yeah, you got caught, but this is still ongoing for Mississippi, and then you'd be surprised. Doesn't Jerry Jones have a podcast or a radio show every week in Dallas?
Every Monday. I
Every
believe.
Monday, Jerry's Monday, right?
Something like that, yeah.
Okay, fine. Doesn't he like? Are any of the callers going to be able to ask him a question? Like, Jerry, what's up with that photo, dude? What's up with that photo? Like what? We're just letting it slide.
Yeah, and like I said, Kevin, you don't want to be judged by your worst moments when you're a teenager. You know what I mean? So,
Or adults.
but yeah, right. But especially as a teenager. But at the same time, it's like they don't get that pressure the same way, and that's what this pod is kind of spotlighting on, right? Like this episode is spotlighting on. It's like that pressure is just. He made his little explanation. He talked about how he was curious. Hey, maybe I should have did more at the time. He didn't really apologize for it. You know what I mean, or what have you. And and I wouldn't be surprised if this kind of gets submerged too. And I think that's kind of also the problem, right? This is why that word privilege is kind of popular in 2022, right? These are the reasons why. And it's sad. Like I'd look at it from that perspective, right? Like the last month or so, I've kind of just been like, we're just living in some strange times right now, man. We're living in some strange times. Like what have you learned from all of this? I guess as we wrap this up, like what have you learned, or what can we learn from all of this? Because to me, I think we're still a very long way away from ridicule to quality. I like to call it.
One thing I've learned from all of this is that the struggle continues. And I hope it's a wake-up call, but there's clearly there's still a lot of inequalities going on, and some underlying biases and some societal hurdles in terms for everybody to get the fair and equal treatment that they deserve. But clearly power and privilege plays a role. It's not a justice system on any side. Like what was the woman from Full House? Lori Loughlin?
Yeah.
And Felicity Huffman? How much jail time did they get?
I don't even know if Felicity Huffman got jail time. She was supposed to. I think she just got a bunch of probation.
Okay.
Or if she did serve, it wasn't much. And I mean, like there's some kids, whether they're, it doesn't matter what demographic they come from, but there's kids that got robbed of an opportunity of getting a scholarship or getting something from that school, right? Or those schools, because of situations like that.
So a takeaway would be, I think, as a society, we probably need to relearn what fair and equitable treatment is for everybody, because otherwise this kind of stuff will continue to happen. It's a lot of it is power, privilege, and propaganda.
Right. And this is why I say, like, we're a long way from ridicule equality, meaning like the concept of being tarred and feathered and the perception of it that makes you believe that there's this supply chain for feathers, or this is a supply chain shortage for tars, and we could only give it to a certain, like to some people because there isn't enough time or space to share all this ridiculed equality, and we both know that's impossible. Like this is, like I said, again, these stories are privileged stories. They're human stories. These aren't just sports stories, or it's really a sports story, but it's a human story that directly impacts, like in Favre's case, it directly impacts the disenfranchised, for funds in the poorest state, for people that need it. And what's scary is that how many times, to your point, has this happened in this state or even other states? We only know this because a famous person is involved. But what about other powerful people whose names don't necessarily echo throughout the world or popular society?
To be honest, we know of one of the four, and of course there's at least four. Then you add Ted DiBiase's son, that's five, and there are probably a whole bunch of other people that are involved with it as well.
Yeah, it's not, this is bigger than 4 or 5 people, obviously.
Right, and like, is it Phil Bryant? Was that his name? Was there a Phil Bryant involved with that as well?
A Phil Davis, the former governor.
Okay. So just keeping in mind that our society, like we do have this issue but there are some people that have been like when you say directly affected, these are people. The corruption may have gone so deep, and everyone just got greedy and started looting and taking their cut, that the water has reached a state of, you can't even consume it. That we're not even looking after each, like, you know what I mean?
In America.
That in America of all places, that you're getting some rusty, decrepit water that's not suitable for you or your children, and then you're waiting for government funds for assistance, and you can't get that either because apparently they have nothing. They don't have anything for you or whatever. Like, that is tough in 2022. Like, that is, and these are, one of them's a millionaire. A millionaire. What does he need the money for?
What happened to GoFundMe or
he could have written a check. That Wrangler money was ample. I'm pretty sure. Don't know anybody who plays football in jeans, but I'll go with it. It's commercial, right? Copper Fit or whatever that was. That was some money too. He gets an NFL pension. He's made his millions. He's in Mississippi. It's not the most expensive state in terms of real estate. It's not California or New York. He could have easily cut that check and been like, here. But he's like, I'll take from the poor and disenfranchised before I even touch my money. Who's with me? You know what, Brett? Come with me. I know a guy.
Yeah, where's the crowdsourcing if he needed to do that? Where's the fundraising events?
It's interesting what is,
because that could easily been done too, like a fundraiser or at like an event, a gala, a ball.
Or hey, I'm charging this much for speaking engagements. I'll take that money and give it right back to y'all.
Right.
So where is all that? If they really cared, it'd have been there. Instead, let them drink rusty, non-consumable water, not just for the men and women, but their children as well. I could care less.
And that's the crazy part that gets lost in that too. Like, Deion Sanders right now is at Jackson State and trying to do big things with the HBCU school that he's got that he's coaching right now, and they're in a city that doesn't have proper running water. Like, this is like going to the Dominican Republic and not being able to drink the water. Don't open your mouth when you shower. Like, this is where it's at in America. Like, and to know that like funds is taken from that. When a famous person is involved, it's supposed to blow a story like this up. You know what I mean? And to say it hasn't, I'm not saying that it hasn't, but it doesn't get the same. I would say this: if the story was running a 1,500 meter, it definitely died like halfway through. It definitely died during the second lap.
Calvin, allegedly, I'll repeat this.
Allegedly, yeah.
Allegedly. well, DJ called it allegedly.
Right.
To help recruit Deion Sanders' son, about $1.5 to $2 million was set to be fleeced out. And in case the cost got too high, he may have allegedly known to be like, we can get some cheap prison labor to come put the project together for you. If he knows that, how deep does this go? Do you remember Shawshank Redemption? When the warden was approached by this guy that wanted some contract work done, and he's like, if I don't get this work for my boys, I go under. And he gave him a cake. My wife baked you a cake.
Mm-hmm.
Remember that scene? And then the warden opens it up, and there's the cake, and there's a wad of money tucked into it. And he's like, I think I can arrange to have my boy, have the guys from Shawshank do that work. I'm sorry, to back out of that project kind of thing, so that you guys can put your bid in. That kind of stuff is going on with some of the poorest Americans, but probably some of the wealthiest people in that state.
And again, like, the story's out there, but we we shouldn't be having to look for that story. And I guess that's the point of this too, right? Like, to wrap this up, like, we shouldn't be looking for this story. This is a story that should be we like that should be on, like, to your point, it should be on A1 of the cover news. It should be, you know what I mean, like anytime you put it on a social media, like a news site, you know what I mean, like not CP24, but like, you know, it's just basically should be there as much as possible. And my point is with the media, why is there with the constant swirl, the constant world, the 24-hour spin cycle of news and needing content forevermore, why is there not enough time to talk about this on a big stage? Like, that to me is the wildest shit more than anything else. Like, we live in I'll say it again, we live in a culture where there is, like, people are thirsty for content. Why is this getting submerged? Like, look at what we talked about the last 40 minutes. Like, that to me is the wildest shit. It's the wildest shit. But, you know, we'll leave it there for now, because I definitely going to be following this story. I'll tell you that right now. You know, because that to me is despicable. It's really despicable when you read into that. I implore anybody listening to this to read into that story, the Brett Favre situation in Mississippi. Like, that welfare scandal is insane. It's sickening. You know what I mean? And, like, where is it?
Good question. I'll put it on this list I have of things to look up. The last thing I want to look up in terms of where we're at with things in media coverage, something to do with Hockey Canada.
Oh,
anyway.
That shit, yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'll let me do some looking into that too and see where we at in terms of coverage. And, anyway.
Yes, sir. Well, thank you for hopping on the app, sir. Much appreciated as always.
All right, so let me see. I'm not good in, forget what that country, I'm not good in China. Yeah, China is off my list. Arkansas is now off the list, and Mississippi. Okay. Yeah, we're good.
Sounds about right.
Yep.
Thank you for checking out the latest episode of the Ave Podcast. Now, I'll be back next Friday with a new episode. I appreciate the support, and thank you as always for tuning in, especially to this Brett Favre Privilege Matters edition. I can't believe the year is pretty much over already, but I'm going to make sure I get a few more episodes out in December, so that should be a lot of fun. Hit that like and subscribe button, and click on those 5 stars if you're on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Feel free to do the same and do the equivalent wherever you listen to podcasts. And just make sure you check out SouthSharav.com and check out my catalog, which also includes the R&B Fantasy Draft series that was just wrapped up a couple of weeks ago. Much love and appreciation for the love and respect that you showed throughout the draft. All right, so make sure you check that out on SouthSharav.com, and you can also check that on the South Sharav YouTube channel as well. All right. Now, for my South Sharav family member, Kevin W., this is Cal C., and you just tuned into the latest episode of the Ave Podcast on South Sharav Radio. All right, until next Friday, peace. We out.